Hey folks, it's Rob Flux here with another Sunday session, and tonight is open mic night, and that is when you get to submit your questions through to me and try to stump the guru. Now, if you'd like to submit your questions, you can click on the link below, send your questions through, and I will do what I can to review those questions, do any homework that I need to, and then respond to these on the first Sunday of every single month. So we already have the questions for today, but if you'd like to submit your questions for next month, make sure you click on that link below. Now, by coincidence today, we have a number of questions that are in and around the joint venture topic. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to try and group all of those together and put them in a particular order that hopefully, when I answer the first one, will actually set the foundations for laying the next questions in the queue. Now, you please forgive me. I do have a little bit of a raspy voice. I'm overcoming a head cold, and so you may see me cough, splutter, and sniffle from time to time, but all in the interest of providing a good show to you guys. Now, that said, very first question comes from Julian. So Julian, the profit of a joint venture between two parties. This is a 1:2 subdivision in Brisbane. He goes on to talk about the contributions of each and every party. And so what I want to do firstly is just stand back a step and paint the picture of how typically joint ventures tend to work. Then we'll drill into Julian's specific scenario with who's going to be contributing what in this particular scenario. Now, what we find in a lot of people in our community that they start out with very little money themselves when they're starting the development journey, and they learn the skills in order to do development, but they don't have the cash in order to run the deal. And so they will typically partner up with a money partner. So you have a sweat equity partner and a money partner. Now, both of them are contributing equally into the deal, and because they're contributing equally into the deal, then I guess they tend to go 50-50 in the deal up front. Now, in saying that, the money partner actually has three portions of the deal to actually contribute to. There is actually the deposit in order to, secure the property. There's the serviceability, which is the debt that needs to be borrowed in order to acquire the property. Then there's the liquid cash to run the deal. So if the money partner is able to provide all three of those in a smaller deal, then typically they'll get 50%. Now, the development entity or the sweat equity partner, they tend to do all the education in order to learn what it is that they're going to do. They do all the homework and research as to what area they're going to farm. They actually go and find the deal, negotiate the deal, and then run the deal. And so the parties are contributing, approximately equally, and hence why the 50-50 profit split. Now, as deals get larger in size, then that 50-50 profit split tends to change somewhat. Okay, so as you move away from, the smaller deals, from a duplex or a 1:2 subdivision, that sort of thing, and start stepping up a deal, by the time you get to a 10 townhouse type project, then the financial contributions starts to outweigh the effort in actually running the deal. And so that's when the distribution of profits starts to ratchet a little bit. So you might find that might be a 60-40 profit split in favor of the money partner. When you get to, maybe 20 townhouses, that sort of thing, it might be a 70-30, for example. So that is, again, assuming that the money partner provides everything and the sweat equity partner provides, the skills at the deal and the skills in order to run the deal. Now, where it gets really interesting is what happens if one of the money partner, if the money partner doesn't have all those three elements. Are they not able to contribute to the whole lot? And the equity partner starts to contribute. Well, that might weigh adjust the balance somewhat. But in doing so, you have to weigh up the fact that without that money partner, you couldn't do the deal. So sometimes, whilst you might technically qualify for a little bit more, or be able to justify more rather than qualify a little bit more of the profit split, you can't do the deal without them. So you might want to balance the equation up, for example. So that said, let's have a look at Julian's specific scenario. What he said is he's got a particular project. It's a 1:2 subdivision in Brisbane. The cost of the development site to purchase is about $1 million. One party is going to put in 10% deposit and the serviceability through a normal bank loan. they're going to service the loan, the 90%. So it's going to be a 10% deposit and a 90% loan. So they're providing both of those elements. The second party is putting 120K cash in for running the deal. So the money partner is not providing all three elements. They're not providing the money to run the deal in this particular instance. Okay. So that on paper says, look, that's going, instead of being 50-50, on paper that says, look, I might push the balance of equation up towards the sweat equity partner on paper. But as I said, it might be one of those things where, well, because you can't get anyone else to invest in your project, you can't do the deal at all. So you want to start to think about, well, maybe we still leave it at 50-50, especially if this is your first deal. And you might go, do you know what? You're having faith in me. You're having trust in me. I might want to do that. So maybe you could push it to 55-45. Maybe you could push it to 60-40. But my gut feeling in this particular instance is you're probably going to attempt to negotiate that, and the other party is going to, I guess, stand their ground, and you're going to scratch your head and go, what am I going to do? And in order to get the deal across the line, you're probably going to accept a 50-50 profit split. So know that you can negotiate anything, and know that you have, I guess, the justification to negotiate that, but doesn't mean that you will actually get that across the line. So balance up. Do I do the deal versus do I not get the deal at all? Anyway, hope that helps, Julian, and hope it also sets the scene for the next questions that we've got in the process. So next question, again on joint ventures, comes from Simran. Simran says, hi, Rob. A question regarding JVs. I'm a money partner in a single dwelling joint venture. So it sounds like they're doing a knockdown and, I guess, new build. There is a 55-45 profit split agreed. However, the sweat equity partner has factored in a project management fee in the feasibility on top of the profit split he will be getting. This is also his first project, but he works at a development company for 6 years and knows development. Should the profit split cover the project management fees, or is this a common practice that whoever runs the deal gets a PM fee on top? Okay, so firstly, I guess there's a couple of elements that we're going to pull out of this. So whilst it's technically the first deal that they are doing for themselves, by the sound of it, they've been doing development management for 6 years. They've got lots of experience. They've got lots of runs on the board. You can safely assure them the fact that they are going to, well, not safely, you could assume that they've got the experience under their belt. And so this isn't their first rodeo. It just happens to be the first time that they're doing it for themselves. And so they might bring some efficiencies from their day job into this world that might be a little bit over and above what you might get if it was a first-time developer. So that might be one of the reasons why they're trying to justify the 55-45 profit split, because they're trying to argue that they can be more efficient and more effective. Then they're asking for a project management fee on top. Now, myself personally, okay, project management fees are going to be one of those things where the development manager might need that cash flow to, I guess, send the kids to school, put food on the table, those sorts of things. And so from a cash flow perspective, it's fairly common to ask for a project management fee. However, it's not, it's probably 50% of the time that I see that project management fee being in addition to the profit split. Okay. The other 50% of the time, it is part of the profit split and is just taken as a pass through along the way, and the true up is done at the other end. So it's a little bit of a line ball as to how this one might be assessed and interpreted. Sometimes it goes, I guess, towards the development manager getting that as an additional cost, but other times it's not. What's not really clear is which way the profit split. You said 55-45. Is that 55 in favor of them and 45 in favor of you? In which case, it's probably a little bit disproportionate if you're providing all of the funds on a smaller deal. So I would certainly go back, Simran, and say, look, maybe the weighting of that might be a little bit out of balance. Now, depending upon how much of that project management fee that they're wanting to claim might be a little bit of a challenge. But there's also the potential that, depending upon the state that they are in, that they're not legally allowed to charge a project management fee. So you might want to investigate whether that's actually allowed, because in some states, in order to charge a project management fee, you actually need to have a builder's license or a from the regular, or or a project management license from the regulatory authority who looks after the building licenses. So make sure that firstly, if they are trying to do a project management fee, they are licensed to do so. And if you do, I would certainly try to have a little bit harder chat to say, hey, I think the balance of equation might be a little bit too much in your favor. And I guess it really comes down to whether or not you're also sharing if you're sharing the profit, are you also sharing the risk of the deal? What happens if it goes south? Given that you've already cash flowed them along the way, I'm going to guess that they don't have any cash if the project goes south. So, it's not fair that you're funding both the cash, giving away more of the profit, and not sharing the risk on the tail end. Anyway, hope that helps, Simran. Next one, Andy. Andy says, if you enter a joint venture of 3 partners, how do you limit your liability to limit exposure as a personal guarantor, especially when your name is guarantor on loan documents? Now, this one's a little bit trickier because now we're starting to get into legal advice, and I have to be super careful that I'm not allowed to give legal advice on how to limit your liabilities and that sort of thing. But equally, I don't know the kind of partnership arrangement that you're actually entering into here. So not knowing your personal circumstances, I'll just try to step back a little bit and talk a little bit more in general. So, because I don't know if you're 3 money partners investing in someone else's deal, or if you're all sweat equity partners, what your particular role is, all those sorts of things. Okay. So I guess as soon as there are any more than one person in a deal, limiting your liability can be a little bit tricky. Okay. Reason being that I guess if you're trying to get a loan and serviceability of a project, as soon as you have to tie up personal guarantors, the bank is the one that's actually I guess trying to do the exposure. What the bank will try to do is they'll try to get the directors of the entity or entities that are actually doing the project. They'll try to get all of the directors to actually sign the personal guarantors to say that they're all going to be liable for the loan. And that is typically what they call joint and several liability. Joint and several liability means that it is not evenly distributed by the contribution of each party, but rather each party is responsible for the entirety of the debt. So if you've got 3 parties, then technically the bank has coverage 3 times more than they actually need, because each party has 100% liability in order to pay the loan. So if party number 1 can't pay it, then they will come and attack party number 2. If party number 2 can't do it, they'll attack party number 3. So joint and several is typically how the banks will actually try to do that. If you want to limit your liability, then you're going to have to negotiate that directly with the bank and actually say, no, we want, and forgive me, but I don't remember the terminology to actually use here, but you want to have that limited liability so that it is not joint and several, okay, so that you are only responsible for, I guess, your contribution into the project. The other way to potentially do this, Andy, not just negotiate with the bank, but potentially you might want to put your cash into, I guess the parties might want to put their cash into an investment entity, and the investment entity then lends the money in. So the liability lies with the investment entity rather than, I guess, the liability with yourselves. Now, whether or not that's even humanly possible, I guess not knowing the nature of your project, you may still need to do the personal guarantors of the loan. But what we're trying to do is just put a line in the sand to say, look, there is a distance between the development entity and the investment parties. And so that might be the way to actually do that. So you might, for example, be able to plausibly have that investment entity where you've put your contribution into there and the liability is in the loan document over, I guess, to the development entity. That is certainly something you're going to need to speak to your solicitor about. The intricacies of that and the permutations of that are quite broad, but they're only the 2 approaches that I can think of off the top of my head that might be conversation starters for you and your solicitor. Anyway, hope that helps. Next one, Paul. So no longer onto JVs. I guess Paul is asking about, he's in the suburb analysis stage and not confident of understanding his construction costs. He's used a couple of quantity surveyors, so BMT and Napier and Blakely, who publish building cost prices. And he's also approached bespoke house builders but their prices vary massively. Most builders aren't interested in providing either square meter rates or indicative total costs. So what he's concerned is that there's a large spread with regards to the cost of construction. Now, interestingly, I just had this conversation only a couple of days ago in our masterminding group in Melbourne. And equally, we're actually having a quantity surveyor present in Melbourne in a couple of weeks' time. In Brisbane in a couple of weeks' time, specifically on how do you actually calculate your construction costs. So rather than steal all of the thunder from that, I'm just going to paint the picture and encourage you to actually turn up to that event in Brisbane in the June session in Brisbane. So don't quote me on the exact date on that. But if you're watching this after June of 2023, then make sure you're an annual member, go in and subscribe, and you'll be able to see the back catalogue of that recording. So there's fundamentally a couple of elements that actually go into building and construction costs. So the first one is site prep. Okay, so is it a flat site? Is it good soil? Is the ability to get some foundations onto the property easily, or is it on a slopey site with really shitty soil and you need to dig really deep piers and really deep foundations in order to actually get the house block or the building pad set in stone. So that's the first part. Okay. So when you start to do that, I guess there's a small, medium, and large type costs. You might want to talk to your builders about, hey, how do we actually get those building pads set right? That way, what you know then is once I've got a solid foundation or solid piece of concrete, then building the walls on top of that is going to be standard from now on. Okay, from that step forward. So that's the first part, is the site prep. Second part is, and I might just jump back to what I should have said right at the very, very start, is the biggest problem of our entire community is that we're actually asking the wrong question of the builder. We're asking for a cost per square meter to build, but the problem is that the cost to build changes massively based on the size of the dwelling, which comes into step 2 of this point that I'm actually making here. And step 2 is, what is the size of the dwelling? So now, as crazy as it sounds, if I'm building a 150 square meter 3-bedroom townhouse, if I build a 100 square meter 3-bedroom townhouse, I'm still building the same number of bedrooms, same number of bathrooms, the same number of kitchens, and so the majority of my costs are the same. The only thing that's actually changed is the size of the rooms. And when I change the size of the rooms, I've already built 4 walls. All I'm really adding, so it's largely not much additional labor, but rather what I'm doing is I'm actually adding some extra material, some extra timber, or some extra steel frame in order to, expand out the size of the room. So getting space is actually relatively cheap once you've actually got the 4 walls, in their smallest element. So what you should be doing is trying to find a baseline size property. So for example, give me the price of a 200 square meter apartment. And then if it's bigger than 200 square meters, then it's cheaper on a dollar per square meter rate. If it's less than 200 square meters, then it's going to be more expensive because you're going to be shrinking it. Now, that sounds crazy, but that's just the case where the size of the room has a massive impact on the cost per square meter. The next part is, what are the fixtures and fittings that you're actually going to be putting in there? So is it going to be, just a pure concrete floor? Is it going to be carpet? Is it going to be tiles? Is it going to be porcelain tiles? Is it going to be marble? Is it going to be a laminate bench top? Is it going to be a Caesar stone bench top with a 20 mil surface? Or is it going to be a 40 mil Caesar stone with a waterfall edge? Okay, so when you start to look at your fixtures and fittings, what is it like? Is it going to be a light bulb? Is it going to be a chandelier? Okay, so when you start to look at your fixtures and fittings and what actually goes into it, the standard of finish, many times we say, we just want a medium property. But medium to one builder might have very different fixtures and fittings to medium to the next builder. So rather than us saying, tell me what you've got as medium, we want to go to them and say, this is what I deem to be medium. This is what I'm seeing in the market. I want to see this specific kind of outcome. What is the cost for this kind of product, please? And if you ask a better question, you're going to get a much better answer. So they're really the elements that actually go into it. And the last element that goes into it is the architectural nature of the building. So from an architectural nature of the building, especially if you're doing 2 or 3 stories, then the engineering level that goes into ground floor has to hold a whole bunch of weight up above. And so if you have what they call a box on box, so if you can imagine, I guess a square box on the ground floor, and then you put another box directly on top. So the box on box, if those 2 walls on the second floor line up with the walls on the ground floor, then the weight distribution is all the way through. So from an engineering perspective, it's relatively easy and cheap to build. However, if you have an architectural design where you're trying to get some, I guess, layering to it, so you can have, I guess, a nice street appeal and those sorts of things, then that can add some engineering costs to the cost of the dwelling. So do you have, I guess, balconies that overhang? Do you have what they call cantilevers, those sorts of things where the engineering of the ground floor and the engineering of the floor up above need to account for, I guess, the leverage points that are actually going to be sitting on there. So if you offset the upper floor in a little bit and the outer floor is down a little bit, then depending upon where you offset it internally, is all of that weight hanging over the middle of the lounge room, and the middle of the lounge room is just vacant void space. So the span in between, I guess, the walls in the lounge room has to take bear those weights. So when you start to think of all of those things, that can have a massive implication of cost. So that's a lot to say. Now, we do have, as I said, that presentation coming up in Brisbane in a couple of weeks' time that's actually going to go through that in a lot more detail. That will help you to actually understand how you can break that down. They're going to give you some really good rules of thumb in how you can actually start to multiply that out. So watch that episode, Paul. You will very much enjoy it. Next question comes from Vanessa. Vanessa says, I have a deal that almost has its development approval, currently at public notification. So well done. Once the DA is approved, what is needed to gain GRV finance? So that is gross realised value finance. Does the building contract need to be signed, a QS completed, and are there other expectations that need completion prior to applying for GRV finance? So Vanessa, firstly, I'm just going to do some terminology just for everyone who's not actually following. So what you're talking about is gross realised value. So being able to base the construction the lend on the value of the finished product at the very, very end. Okay. Now, if you are doing residential lending, okay, the residential lenders, so that is dealing with a normal typical bank, and you're going to be paying that back over 20 or 30 years. They will typically do it as a GRV loan by default because they're going to want an 80% loan to value ratio for that construction purposes. But they're going to be assuming that you're going to be keeping everything there. So you'll have to justify to them that you can service the loan and the debt at the very, very end. And you will also need to demonstrate, I guess, the kind of rent that it's going to return, all those sorts of things. So if you do that, residential lender will typically do that. Now, a couple of key points. I guess there's some trigger points if you're doing development and you're trying to get residential loans. They want, by their very nature, they want that loan to be a 30-year loan. So do not tell them that you're going to be selling that. Sorry, I can't tell you I don't want you to lie to the bank. I'm saying you can't tell them you're going to be selling that because they're going to instantly go, well, you're a developer, not a residential investor, because they want residential investments. They want that investment for a long period of time. So you need to be demonstrating to them your intention to actually keep that property if that's the case. So be very, very careful that you don't talk about selling property and you don't talk about the word profit, but rather you're talking about equity and the return on equity and how that's actually going to mean that you're going to have a lower loan to value ratio, which means you can afford the serviceability of the residual stock at the end of the process. That said, if you're going to do commercial lending, now, commercial lenders look at things very differently. They're not so worried that you're going to sell. As a matter of fact, they're happier that you're selling because that is their exit strategy in order to get out of the deal. Now, some lenders will lend on gross realised value, being the value of the end product, and some lenders will lend you on the total development cost. Okay. Now, you're going to have to speak to each lender to see which department that they actually sit in. There's pros and cons for each of those, but typically, by the time they do a percentage of GRV, they'll want a fairly lower, loan to value ratio. So it might, for example, be 60% of the gross realized value is what they'll lend you. Whereas the people who do total development cost, TDC, they might lend you 70% of total development cost. And so when you start to do that, the difference between those, they end up being very, very similar in nature. But you will need to go and investigate and actually talk to those lenders to see which way that they actually go, what is their preferred method. And you will have to get your, valuations done up front in order for them to understand that either way. Now, when was the question? When do I actually go and approach them? Well, you approach them very early in the process. Make sure that they're actually going to be on board, that they're supportive of this. Even before your development approval is in place, you should be able to get indicative conversations from them and the indicative approvals subject to the valuation coming through and subject to the approval coming through. Next question is from Matt. Matt says, hi, Rob. For doing residential subdivision, if the civil contractor says it's an average of 80K per block for flat land, does that include shaping of the land, sewer, stormwater, pipe installation, power, NBN to the front lot, curb and gutter, roads, etc.? How long is a piece of string, Matt? Not knowing the kind of project that you're trying to do, you could be doing a 1 into 2 subdivision, or you could be doing a 1 into 200 subdivision. What I tend to find is that when you're starting to use rules of thumb, then they tend to apply when you're doing scale. Okay, so when you're doing lots of projects, lots of lots, and they're actually averaged out. Sorry, I'm just on a call.
I'm sorry, I'm coming out.
Thank you. Sorry, I'm just on a call. Thank you. Sorry, guys, in a hotel, housekeeping came. What do you know? Okay, getting on with the show. Lost my question. Okay, the bigger the project, the more the averaging starts to come in. So if you're doing something with roads, for example, then that 80K per block is kind of where we're starting to talk about. And yes, it does include all of the things you're actually talking about. So it's including building the road, shaping the land, those sorts of things. But 80K, I'm going to say, depending upon what you're trying to do, it's going to be somewhere between 80 and 120K as the rule of thumb. Once upon a time, it used to be 60 when I started this game. So things have changed, folks. But yes, it does include all of those. But, and here's the but, okay, let's just imagine that you've got this giant square block of land and you can put a road right in the middle of it and you can have lots on either side of it as you go. Now, if you build that road and you've got lots on both sides, then the cost of the road and the sewer and the stormwater and electricity that actually go underneath the road and in the nature strip is going to be shared on both sides of the road, which means that your averaging then starts to work. If, however, you've got a block and the road has to be on one side only, and you've only got lots on the other side, then you've built the exact same road, but only half the properties, only half the lots that you're actually sharing the costs with. So when we're talking about rules of thumb, we have to be very, very careful that we can actually apply the rules of thumb appropriately, so to speak. Now, that said, I'm going to assume, based on the nature of your question and the nature of our audience, that you're not talking about doing a 200 lot land subdivision. You're probably talking about a 1 into 2, and 80K, would pretty much in most instances cover, a basic 1 into 2 with crossovers and NBN and that sort of thing, 80K per lot. As a matter of fact, it's probably somewhere between 100 and 160K. So yeah, that 80K per lot is probably on the higher side, but does cover all of those things. Kamesh says, I'm new to property development and heavily restricted on funds. Aren't we all, mate? I have friends who are looking for the principal residences, who are looking for principal residences and interested to find subdividable properties so we can look for opportunities to split them and keep one each. How can we plan this JV? What kinds of money arrangements work in this case, assuming my friend will be bearing most of the mortgage responsibilities? Thank you very much. Okay, Kamesh, there's a couple of elements here that you want to start to think about first. So you've said how to keep one each. Now, when you say keep one each, there's a difference between, sharing the profits of one each and keeping one each. And I just want to be very clear on this, because if you keep it, that means that whatever residual debt is actually remaining means that you're going to get 50% of the debt on one block and they're going to get 50% of the debt on the other block. But given that you said you've got restricted cash and restricted funds, can you actually afford to keep that residual debt? So you want to make that decision up front, do that self-assessment and go, hey, can I afford to keep that at the end? Because what might have to happen is you might need to sell your part and they might keep their part because they can afford to keep it. So when you start to plan that, that starts to change how you put your entity structures in place, okay? Because you're going to be keeping some and selling some. So the way that you structure that might be very, very different to if you're both keeping something and you're separating the titles. Now, depending upon the state that you are in, you might be able to do this one little trick. But I need you to make sure that you actually speak to your solicitor in order to see whether or not this actually applies. And I also need you to talk to your accountant to actually understand the implications of how this would actually work. Okay, so there's a thing called, tenants in common, which means that you can actually purchase the property with a guaranteed split of what those titles will be, and a thing called a deed of petition. Now, those two work together hand in hand to say, well, if I'm doing a 1:2 and I own 50%, then when we split the title in two, then I would like my 50% to be applied to this lot and their 50% to be applied to that lot. That's what the deed of petition actually does. Now, the implications of that are different in each state. Sometimes there is no stamp duty associated with that. Sometimes there is stamp duty associated with that. That changes from state to state. But it might not be the right mechanism you need from an asset protection perspective. That might be the easy way to separate the title, but it might not give you the asset protection from the project perspective if you've constructed something, any ongoing liabilities. Equally, doesn't give you the tax distribution side of the tax minimization side of things that you're looking for as well. But that's the mechanism that you're looking to potentially engage, and then it's what entity structures do I put in and around that. So definitely commish one for your solicitor and talk about those two particular items. Should I do tenants in common and should I do a deed of petition in order to separate the titles? Hope that helps. Jay says, well, this is a very long question, Jay. Okay, Jay says, to successfully execute a deal, you need 3 types of equity: acquisition funds, operating capital for running the deal, and construction costs if applicable. I have a slightly different point of view on that, but I understand the concept you're going with. Okay, so I think that's 3 points in the project that you actually need funds, not 3 types of equity. If you need to look for money partners for each of these 3 stages, would you raise all the necessary funds up front to ensure safety and guarantee the execution of the project? Or alternatively, would you raise the money in different stages throughout the project timeline? For example, first stage, raise the money for acquisition plus DA and consultants. Once you've got the DA, go to the second round, raise money, execute the project or construct. And at the end of the project, raise money again for the marketing and sales, infrastructure charges, plan ceiling, etc. Now, while securing all of the funds up front provides you certainty and peace of mind, but it also paying interest from day one. On the other hand, raising money in different stages may disappoint early investors and create concerns about project success. Investors may worry if you see repeatedly requesting additional funds, thinking the project is not going as planned. What are your thoughts about these 3 situations? Thank you very much. Jay, really good question, mate. I guess there's a lot of detail to your question. And I did say I did have a slight difference of opinion with regards to your phraseology. You said 3 types of equity. So let me clarify. There's actually 3 types of cash that you actually need, and at 3 different stages. Okay, so firstly, you need deposit to purchase. Okay, that is true equity. Okay, you need serviceability in order to fund any debt, and you need liquid cash to run the deal, which is liquid equity. Okay, then you need that at the point of acquisition, as you appropriately raised, and the point of construction, which again you appropriately raised, and any residual stock that you're going to keep at the end. So you only really need it at 2 stages. Okay, so So whereas you've indicated 3, but your point still remains valid. Should you be raising the funds up front, or should you be raising it, I guess, towards the end? Now, bearing in mind, I guess, all the ASIC requirements as to how you raise investors, so we want to just park that for the purposes of what you're trying to say. The challenge here, as you've rightly pointed out, is if you raise the funds day one, are you paying interest on them day one, or do you, I guess, try to raise secondary lots of funds along the way? Now, my personal opinion on this would be you need to disclose upfront at the very, very start to whoever is going to be the investor at the start that you're going to need multiple rounds of funding and what those multiple rounds of funding start to look like. So you're not raising the concerns that you raise because they're known upfront. And you're going to invite the investor to say, would you like to participate in the multiple rounds as we go? However, I don't need all the cash today. What I need is just your awareness that you're willing to do that at the point in time when it actually comes about. Okay. Now, ideally, that first investor would be the only investor that you actually need to take this all the way through to completion, and you're only paying the money as it's drawn down. That would be the ideal outcome. Okay. Sometimes the investor says, well, if it's sitting there parked in the bank, it's not doing me any good. I want to put that money out to work, and I might want to invest that in someone else's deal where I can actually get an interest rate from day one. So the real question to you is, do I want to risk the fact that they won't have their funds back and I might not get an investor? And so you need to do the calculation to say, well, if I did pay the interest all the way, how much would that actually be? Remember, we're only talking about the arbitrage between what you actually needed for the acquisition and what you need for the next stage being construction. So, maybe you don't need to borrow a huge amount more. So, you're only paying interest on a smaller amount for a smaller period of time as the difference between it. So it might be that you pay an extra 50K in interest, maybe it's 100K, depends on the size of the deal that you're actually talking about. But how much money are you actually making? And when you put that into the feasibility as a line cost, does the feasibility still make sense? So I guess there's a risk element. Probably the risk element is, what if I don't get that investor back again? Or what if I don't get another investor? So my humble opinion would be, if you can have one investor that can stay from start to finish, that is way better than trying to hustle at every single stage, look desperate, and potentially, as you've said, rightly make a disjointed outcome. Instead, you want to have that full disclosure. You want to have that conversation upfront. Find the right investor who's willing to inject funds multiple times along the way. That's the ideal outcome. Hope that helps, Jay. Next one comes from Bridget. Bridget says, please could you comment on the current environment on high and potentially still rising interest rates, high building costs, and the fact that many builders are going under, which is making buyers reticent to buy land and to build. How do you see this affecting property developers, particularly those doing subdivisions with the intent to sell land? Thanks, Bridget. Bridget, this is a theme that is, I guess, going around quite a bit at the moment in our community. And I have answered this to a small extent, I guess, many, many times across multiple forums, to the point where I actually do a regular, about every 4 months or so, I regularly do a regular state of the market update. I've got one of those coming up in about 6 weeks' time. We've not formally announced it yet, but I put about 200 hours worth of research into that particular one-day event. So watch out for that. It'll be called the Property Development Summit. So watch out for that, and I'll go into this in super detail because there are many, many layers to this particular answer. And because I put 200 hours into the research of that, the answer that I'm going to give you here is only going to be a fraction of a subset of what you're actually going to get on that day. But you've got a couple of things that are actually that I'll say at a very high level. Firstly, high interest rates and high inflation is actually a buying opportunity for us rather than a negative. Okay, this is we are, as developers, we are counter-cyclical. As the market slows down, is a great time for us to buy, and as the market rises, is a great place for us to sell. So what you're seeing is Joe Public as an investor is very, very bad for them. But for us, it creates opportunity. For us, it means that there are people that would be selling right now that wouldn't normally be selling because they're not able to sustain their loans. Now, I'm not talking about trying to take advantage of people in hardship, because that's just bad karma, and I don't encourage that at all. But rather, I'm saying there's going to be more opportunities for properties coming onto the market than would normally typically be because people can't afford to keep them. It also means that there are opportunities for you to get really, really creative terms. So you might get long delayed settlements. You might get the ability to access the land and start the construction process, all sorts of things like that, because the I guess the interest rates are going to be impacting you. You want to, but they're going to want high price points, and they want the high price points that they had 12 months ago because the market was booming 12 months ago. So they want these really, really ridiculously high price points that they can't get anymore because nobody's in the market. But you can say, well, I can still give you that price point if you give me time. And so right now is one of the best times that you could actually be negotiating on low and no money down deals that you're going to find. I'm going to say that it's probably the best opportunity I've seen for the last 20 years. And I've actually been projecting this for the last 18 months that this moment was coming, and it's here right now. This is the market where you want to be, as Warren Buffett would say, be greedy when others are fearful and fearful when others are greedy. Now, that said, great time to get in, okay? I guess the building costs, well, the challenge with building costs is that they rose, I guess, very rapidly based on two effects. And so the first one was COVID, which created global supply chain issues. That has gone, okay? So I guess the global supply chain has come back to relative normality, so things are a lot more predictable. The other thing is that they, I guess, were boosted by supply and demand because the government printed a whole bunch of money on the building bonus, and so everybody had this demand to actually construct. Again, that is over. So the continual rising building costs, I don't see that you're going to see, I guess, rising building costs to the rate that it was before. Before it was very unpredictable. Now it is very predictable. It is still high, granted, and that does make making deals profitable challenging. But now they are predictable, and that's the most important part. By being predictable, we can now factor that into our feasibilities to see whether or not, if we bought well, whether or not when we buy, we will actually sell well. Okay. But your point on, hey, what if I want to sell as land? Well, my caution to you would be, the price points that you might have been able to get to land 12 months ago, maybe if you just drop your price point 10K, the land will probably turn over. Drop a 20K and turn over. You'll still be profitable, but you may not make as much money as you did before. But if the price is right, people will buy. Okay, absolutely, people will buy. You also want to start to think about putting house and land packages together so that people have a fixed price, known outcome of what it is that they're actually going to be putting on the property where possible. And the last point would be, well, we make money by solving problems that others don't want to take on. They're worried about the building and construction side of things. Why don't we take that problem on, actually construct and give them a finished product, take away their pain point, and just go, hey, here's the finished home. Why don't you look at that? So a couple of different ways to actually exit that. Now, as I said, I will go into a lot more detail in the upcoming, Development Summit one-day event. Watch this space. We'll be announcing that in the next couple of weeks. It'll be an all-day event, and generally we have a good 700 or 800 people on those calls, so they are fantastic. Great place to ask all of your questions about everything, and I'll do everything I can to go into super detail on all of it. And as I said, 200 odd hours of research goes into those. Next one, Craig says, how will the new 7-star energy rating and disabled doorway access building codes affect new builds? Will it limit ceilings and voids, and will it increase the building costs? These new codes are due to be introduced in October 23. Do you believe these codes will become enforceable? Craig, absolutely, categorically, it is coming. You cannot avoid it. It's there. So National Construction Code has been, forecasting these changes for a good couple of years. They've been in draft, they've been announced, and each state is rolling them out slowly, state by state. And there are elements that might be deferred, I guess, so as a graduated deployment, but it is going to roll out. So as you rightly pointed out, 7-star energy efficiency rating, and you've said disabled doorway access. There's actually a more politically correct way of saying it, but more livable homes, so that it's accessible to, I guess, a greater portion of our community. So that is coming. So there is going to be a transition for that. It will mean the cost of buildings do go up, but it's going to go up for everybody. So, it's not like your one project is going to be disadvantaged. The entire, I guess, community is going to be disadvantaged, and that ends up being passed on to the consumer, and so the cost of dwellings will inevitably go up. However, being a 7-star energy rating, the cost of running those will inevitably go down. So swings and roundabouts, there's us as developers will bear the upfront cost, and then we've just got to factor in whether or not we've got buyers to take that on straight away. Where it can get interesting is development approvals that were approved some time ago. It's not super clear whether or not you have to build those to the new 7-star energy efficiency rating because it was approved under the old schemes, or whether or not that transition will allow us to keep building, I guess, as per originally intended. That part I'm not really sure on, but I know that the HIA and the master builders are doing lots of presentations on this at the moment to say what the implications are. I'd highly encourage you register for one of those. Most of them are free to actually get to. I haven't yet had a chance to get to one. So Grace says, and let me just do a time check. How are we traveling here for time? I've got a whole ton of questions still to come. I'm not sure that I'm going to get through all of them. But Grace says, I've casually come across a potential deal through a friend. I'm not ready to do myself, not enough experience or cash. What is the mechanism for arranging the opportunity? What is involved? And then selling it to another developer to get a finder's fee. So Grace, this is going to largely depend on how you are actually acquiring it, or how you are controlling it, more to point, and what state you're actually in. So the answer does vary slightly. Okay, in most instances, what people do and what people are legally allowed to do are not necessarily the same thing. Okay, many people will charge a finder's fee where they're not legally allowed to, but they will get away with it. So be very cautious on what it is that you need to do here. Now, if you are doing this under an option agreement, then you will be able to pass it on to someone else, and you will be able to just charge an assignment fee in order to do that, and that is going to be legally workable in pretty much every single state. However, there may be some stamp duty implications depending upon the state that you're actually in on how that actually works. So that might make, I guess, by the time you charge your finder's fee, if you have a stamp duty implication on yourself, you need to make sure that the finder's fee is justified by the stamp duty. The next thing that other people do, which is the less than legal way, is they just charge a fee, whether they're meant to or not, and because you're actually meant to be a licensed real estate agent in order to charge a finder's fee. So a lot of people just charge the fee and they get away with it. Now, it's not the right thing to do, but a lot of people do it. But if you do so, then because you're doing something illegal, a lot of the time people are, I guess, not documenting appropriately, in order to minimize the audit trail. So they won't sign a contract and then, I guess, pass that contract on to someone else because they want to make sure that they're not on that audit trail. So be very, very cautious of that. And the third way, and by far the best way, is to actually partner with someone who has a licensed agent's fee and actually work with them in order to do that. That is one of the reasons why we created Development Sites Australia. So Development Sites Australia is a marketplace for deal finders to list their deals. We, as licensed real estate agents and buyers agents, then can represent you. We charge the fee and we give you a referral for the process. Okay, so that allows you to do that on a more legal basis. So look for Development Sites Australia. It's development.site. See if I can find a link to that to help you out. Here we go, Development Sites Australia and development.site. If you do that, then it is free to list. It is free to search. Okay. The finder's fee gets charged when the person searching wants to get introduced to the deal finder and the deal itself. So we give them an overview of the deal to allow them to see if they've actually got an interest. They sign an agency agreement which says that they're committed to paying a finder's fee, and then what we do is we share that finder's fee with the person who has introduced the property to us. So very, very worthwhile if you want to do that and cover your butt, basically. So yeah, do that. Now, next one. Boy, we've still got a number of questions coming in, but in the interest of time, I might cut this short. This will be the last question, and I've got a couple that I'll pass on to next month. Paul says, hi, Rob. I understand that when I'm starting out in property development, it is crucial that you become an area expert, focusing on just 3 suburbs. I know someone who says that, so that he must be listening to me. Thank you, Paul. I understand why this is so. However, I do often see medium and sometimes small development companies who have developed across multiple areas within a council a lot more than 3 suburbs. This is obviously inevitable and an important part of growing your business. Can you please provide some insight as to when is a good time to be able to expand your areas when you develop? Is this when you take on more staff? When do you recommend this to actually occur? So Paul, mate, fantastic question. What I might do is I might just broaden it out to, I guess, what I actually recommend, because it's apparent that you're quoting me in this instance. And I'll talk to why this is actually important. Most people look at many, many strategies, and they look at many, many areas. So they're looking at lots and lots of things. Now, when you're looking at lots of things, the ability to know lots of things about that means that you're very shallow in the amount of knowledge that you actually have. Instead, if you can flip it like this and only know one thing and know one thing well, you can get very, very deep in your knowledge on that. So my recommendation is choose one strategy, okay? Get very, very good at that one strategy. Get to know the rules of that. Choose one council, because even with the one strategy, 537 councils out there means there's 537 different ways of knowing that one same thing. And then from there, once you've got that one council, you can get to know that council's rules and you get to know them very, very well. And then from there, that's when I recommend the 3 suburbs. And we go through a process where we teach our students through a suburb assessment process, with suburb selection process. We have a rough cut FISO, which reverse engineers the entire suburb and gives it a red light or green light as to whether or not that suburb has lots of opportunities, lots of evidence of other people doing work, and evidence that those people are actually profitable. So that's the process that we actually recommend in our property development formula side of things. So I guess what that does is allow you to get into the process, learn the trade, get very, very good at what you're actually doing, and understand the market like this. So you're going to get to be able to make assessments on things in minutes rather than hours. So that's when you start, okay, when you're at the start of your journey. As you rightly said, as you start to grow your business, as you start to scale, the homework that you've done on those 3 suburbs, you can then apply similar homework on the next couple of suburbs, the next couple of suburbs, and you will eventually expand your business. But in the early days, if you want to get traction, if you are looking at way too many things, the ability for you to get traction is very, very hard. So if you look at just the one thing and you look at that very, very deep, you get very, very deep in the knowledge, you get very, very fast. So when do you scale? Probably project 2, 3, 4, something along those lines, where you've actually got the runs on the board, you're getting momentum. All the hard yards that you've put in the early days have meant that you've built relationships in all of those areas. And so those relationships are starting to pay for themselves. So now it's time to then broaden your horizons and build relationships in new areas. But that does take a few years to actually get there. So hope that helps. Now, there are some extra questions in here. I can see some questions from Rob, Simran, and Chai. Unfortunately, guys, have run out of time, but your questions will be first cab off the rank next time round. Now, for anyone, I just mentioned our property development formula. For anyone who is actually interested at all in our property development course, we do run a 12-month education and mentoring program. If you can click on the link below, go and check it out, see if that's something of interest to you. And if not, we would love to see you at one of our upcoming meetups. Now, we run these meetups all the way around the country. We run them in Brisbane, Sydney, Melbourne, and now Adelaide. So if you want to come to one of our meetups, then I guess click on this link. So developernetwork.com.au/events. And we would love to see you at one of our upcoming meetups. Till then, folks, it has been an absolute pleasure. And if you want to join us for our next open mic night, make sure that you submit your questions on this link here, and I will do everything humanly possible to respond to that one. Till then, I will see you next week on our next Sunday session or at one of our meetups. Till then, bye.